Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. I've got on the table some grassy panels made with watercolour that I made. I've just looked it up. It was back in 2017 when I took a November sabbatical to an amazing place on the island of Paros, a creative retreat where people can come and work on writing or music or art, as I was then doing. And one of the many things I got up to there was going around the garden collecting grasses and then attaching them to watercolour paper and then just playing with colour combinations, watercolours. It's such a stress-free way, again, to explore with your watercolour paints, to discover the colour combinations that make your heart sing, to discover how blending and water makes a difference to how the paints go on. These are, because I needed to glue these down, they have a coat of gesso. I can't any longer remember whether it was plain gesso or I've also got some watercolour ground on the table. More of that in a minute. I made lots and lots of extras while I was there. I glued down lots of grasses. And they've been waiting since 2017 for me to do something with them, but I thought it's only fair to show you a little bit of the process of getting this far, and then I might go a little further with some of those. So I've just been out in the garden to pick some grasses, and it's a really simple but a lovely summery technique to play with. These are, as per usual, some weeds from the garden. I've got a sheet of the watercolour paper I've been using, sort of in between cheap and expensive watercolour pad, the gold line pad, and all I've done is I'm tearing it into quarters, and I'm tearing it because I actually really like a couple of rough edges, very happy to have a couple of rough edges. So that's a simple question of fold it in half, create a crease, fold it in half again, create a crease, a nice firm crease so that you can then just pull it apart. There we go. So those edges are not even quite as rough as I would like, really. I don't know if you can see these grasses are giving off oodles. So anybody who has asked in the past about whether natural materials last, these, as far as I know, were glued down with medium, but any acrylic glue would do, and then have a coat of gesso over the top of them. And as you can see, how many years later? Nearly 10. Certainly 8 years later, they're all fine. There's nothing coming off. These are a different matter because they're fresh, but I glued these down fresh as well. I'm not saying you've got to dry them, excuse me, or press them or anything like that. I'm just going to make it, oh, hello, little spider. Yeah. You don't really want to be here. Come on, let's take you outside. Back in a sec. Okay, on we go. So none of these are exactly the same as the Greek ones. Why would they be? Why would the same grasses grow in a Czech South Bohemian garden as on a Greek island? I don't know, but I'm sure they'll be fine. So I'm going to try a variety of them. Going to try gluing them down. And as long as you glue in the direction of growth, for the most part, you can keep things intact. And I mean, one of the things I absolutely love about this is how the paint then pools within the texture of the grasses. It's a, as I say, very simple but very magical kind of a thing to play with. Which other ones should we use? That's quite nice. That's another one of those. So maybe one of those, several of those, a couple of those, and have we got any? Yes, these are different. Let's have a couple of these. These are the ones that are sort of most of. So if those work well, that'll be great. I'll go and pick lots more and glue them all down. So I would rather glue these with a matte medium because I'm not that much of a fan of shininess, except where I choose to have it. But I seem to have some gloss medium here, and given I'm going to be gessoing over it anyway, it'll it'll work out as matte in the long run. I'm just creating a little arrangement of those because they're rather pretty. And there are going to be seeds around, and I'm also fine with that. We'll see how successful this is. The grasses in Greece. The grasses in Greece. Sounds like the start of a tongue twister. The grasses in Greece were already quite flat and well behaved. So sort of like this one. That's, yeah, that might be nice on there. This is going to be a lot to try and pin down. You can see on all of these I've just done one, and that was enough to keep in position. So maybe I'm overdoing it, but I'm having some fun. Let's have a go with this. I think I want a slightly looser, softer, waterier glue. It's a while since I've used this because I don't like the gloss, so it's a bit stiff. And I'm just going to use one of my cheap Swedish furniture store children's craft brushes. Get some of that on there. And as I say, I'm going to, let's start here because I think they're going to be fairly simple. That's a really thick grass, that one. This one is going to go down much more easily. This one is going to press quite nicely. Actually, let's not start there because I think that's going to be quite tricky. I'm just going to go in and get these glued down. So there you go. You see, it's a question of living with the fact that our lovely dimensional grasses are now going to be flat, and that's going to change them, but it's going to change them into something equally delightful. So let's get under there. The toughest bit of this, if I remember rightly, and let's remember this is a long time ago that I was doing this, was getting the stems to glue down. So these little grassy bits are like, oh, hello, it's another spider. Sorry, spider. Hang on. No, really, not on the craft table. Back in a sec. Just want to say, this one's beautiful. He's got a little green body that exactly matches the piece of paper I've just picked him up on. I'm just going to take him outside. That's why I didn't spot him. He was perfectly camouflaged amongst the grass. Extraordinary. I don't think I've ever seen a spider that colour before. Really beautiful. Good, okay, so I'm getting glue sort of in between, right down into those spaces. And I'm being slightly brutal with these grasses because I want them to be spread out and I want them flat into the page, which means I need to get glue kind of under all the little tendrils and so on and so forth. So we'll glue, then while I'm letting the glue dry, we can come to some of these Greek ones with watercolour paint, and then I can come back to gesso these, and so in the end you'll have seen the whole process. You might not see the whole process in the right order, but you will get to see all of it. So that's pretty good. And I'm just getting in under that stem there. You saw how it lifted up. It hadn't got glue underneath it. There'll be another sort of gluiness when we do the gesso. The gesso also helps to just bed these into the paper, but I do need to make sure there's glue underneath those stems so that they will stay put. There we go. Close enough. As I say, when the gesso comes, there'll be another chance to sort of glue things down. And you'll see that according to the shape of the grass, the process will be easier or more difficult, depending. How many have I got here? That's really too many. 3 stems is going to be better than 4. Compositionally, my guess is 3 stems are better than 4. Quite like that one because it's quite fine. These two are similar to one another. Let's have the fine one in the middle then. And again, you can sort of position where these strands are going to go a little bit, but it's going to change as soon as I put the glue on because that's going to, yeah, see what I mean? So again, with the brush, I'm just going to try to get that to spread out into the shape I'd like it. Again, this is quite a bulky, bushy grass compared to some I've used. So again, I'm being fairly firm with that brushwork to just get it to stay in place. Okay, I think I may have rediscovered a technique, which is to make sure you put some glue down first. There we go. So that is going to grab the stems. Nice. See, if I'd come home and done some more of it instead of waiting since 2017, I'd have remembered that discovery. But I've rediscovered it now, so it's fine. Come on, you. I do love that fine one. I need to go and look for some more of those while the grasses are out and doing their thing. So let's have you, so there's clearly a breeze blowing here, which is blowing things in that direction. That's an imaginary breeze, obviously. So let's get some of this to spread out as we did with its partner piece. There we go. That's rather nice. I like the composition of that. So you've got some influence on the composition of where these things go. But partly you have to just let nature take the lead, which as a process obviously makes me quite happy that I'm not the one in control of everything. I'm working with these grasses, letting them, oh dear, look, it all came off. So having said he was the easier one to work with, I'm completely wrong. Let's spread him out again. There we go. Trial and error, as all good artwork exploration is and should be. So I'm just going to make sure there aren't too many obvious brush strokes in that background, because even as I apply gesso, it will have an impact on what comes later. So again, just getting down into those gaps with the glue so that when I come to put the watercolor on, it's the plant shapes, not glue strokes, that are the main textures. I'm going to leave that to dry, hope for the best. These are really pretty, and there are hundreds of these out there. So again, if this one works, this will be beautiful, and I will be heading back out into the garden for some more. I just love them. They're so delicate. They've got much less bushiness to them. So actually, in terms of how they'll grab paint, that will be slightly less maybe than some of the really bushy ones we've got going over there. Which way up do you want to be? Do tell. I'm very happy to go with whichever way up works for you. There we go. Okay, so that's interesting. These are quite delicate flower heads, and they're heading all over the place as I spread them out. Not willing to hold their shape at all, but I can, again, with the brush, just dabbing down, encourage those to spread out again. And for the now, I'm going to absolutely live with, not only live with, but embrace those little bits of seed flying everywhere, because I think that's rather lovely. Oh, I see, forgot again. Put down some glue first, lots of seeds, that's all good. Then put the grass down. There we go. That's going to change how things happen. Okay, if you want to go off to the side there, that's fine by me. So it's a good amount of glue on the brush, because, as I say, it's got to get down into those grassy heads and seeds and allow them to make contact with the paper. This is why working with one stem is better than working with multiple stems, because as I'm working on this one, I'm messing up what was going on with that one. So one stem at a time. Why not start with one stem at a time? But I was being ambitious, because I did lots of one-stemmed ones 8 years ago in Greece, so I thought I'd be bold and go straight for 2 stems. But as you see, it's maybe not ideal. Maybe you want to rethink that, Alison, for the next time around. There we go. I'm going to let that dry, because when the gesso goes onto it, if there are places that are still floating in midair, the gesso will have an impact on that. I'm really looking forward to seeing what those seeds do in terms of paint. So that means I'm going to have to show you at least one of these new ones. I was planning to only paint Greek ones today. But that would be mean, wouldn't it? Not letting you follow through on some of these. There we go. So here's really quite a bushy one. So let's see what we can do to glue it down. There we go. Straight over. And that one. It's spreading out quite nicely, that one. Contrary to my expectations. See, I forgot the glue again in advance, didn't I? But not to worry. We can peel up, spread this glue out, and put it down again. There we are. Oh, that's quite good. Quite like that. but that's a much bulkier thing, that, as I say, than the grasses that I was using in Greece. Sorry, I'm really enjoying the alliteration of that. The grasses in Greece grow grouped, greenly. Gorgeous doesn't work because it's not a GR. Right, and again, I'm going to get right down in there, and I'm kind of bopping down into those grasses to get those seedy bits to spread out a little more, because I think that's going to be fun when we come to the painting. Need to put a little bit under this stem. I like that leaf there, but I'm not sure it's going to survive the process. As in, I think I might just snip it off because I think it's going to be simpler. Grand. And again, I'm going to let that dry, because when the gesso goes on, that's going to create another layer of clearing things off. So I'm going to wipe down my mat, check for spiders, any more spiders, let those dry a little bit, and then maybe we can put the gesso on before we move on to the Greek ones. Look at these beautiful leftovers. It's tempting to get the gel plate out, isn't it? We'll see. Put those to one side, clear up, and I'll be back shortly. I have set those others aside to dry, I think, rather than heat drying them, because I don't want to cook my grasses. And I've pulled out a couple of the Greek ones. So I think I will put just a little extra bit of gesso onto these, or at least onto one of them, where I can see they've not got a very good covering. I can kind of see through to brownish grass underneath. So again, you'll see this right now, and then we will gesso a couple of the others maybe later on. It's just, again, with a downward motion as much as anything else to get the gesso in here. So the point of gesso is that it creates a paintable surface, a surface that paint will take well on. And although I'm using watercolor card here, I think this was probably watercolor paper as well, I'm sure it was, that I had back in Greece in 2017. So the paper itself would be perfectly happy to take the paint. The grasses I wasn't so sure about, and particularly the gel medium or glue that you've used might not play very nicely with whatever watercolor paints you use over it. By the way, this could also be distress inks. We'll maybe do a couple with distress inks so that we can show that inks or acrylic or any other sort of water-based ink that you've got will do. You can also use paint, of course. So you can see that's a very simple way of just creating a surface that will respond well to paint. That's what gesso is for, to make the grasses do that. I mentioned watercolor ground, so cold press ground. This is one made by Golden. Their watercolor line is called Core. I mean, you know, who came up with that? So watercolor ground is a beautiful thing that you can put onto any surface to create a watercolor surface. Specific, I mean, it's the essence of a watercolor gesso. This is acrylic gesso, so it's really an acrylic primer for acrylic paints, but it works very well with gesso if you're using it on craft purposes. If you're doing a sort of full-on watercolor painting, then you might want to think about using a watercolor gesso or watercolor ground to create your surface. But working mixed media, gesso really will be fine. But this watercolor ground, particularly the cold press one, gives you an incredible texture as well. So onto a paper that is not already watercolor paper, you can give yourself a watercolor surface by using something like this watercolor ground. And as I say, it is amazing for creating that lovely, if you get a really heavy duty cold press watercolor paper which has just the glorious paper textures within it, that's what this watercolor ground will get you. So it's again, it's just a great thing to have in your kit if you are somebody who likes to play with watercolors, not always on expensive watercolor paper. So that's just showing you that gessoing process. Lost the gesso lid. Where do you suppose I put it? Underneath here. Excellent. So those two both need to dry a little further. So for watercolour purposes, I'm going to switch to a couple of these where I haven't done an extra coat of gesso. I'm just going to carry on with from where they're at. And as I was saying, the joy of the, is that the one I've just can't tell. That one's still drying. It's got a sheen on. Okay, this one I haven't done anything to. So I have my watercolour paints in their pans here. I've also got, anybody who saw the stenciling videos using the American Journey watercolours, I've got that tray with things that I've squeezed out of the tubes. Some of these I have squeezed out of tubes, many of them actually. I bought the tubes, not pans. And I've got another tray here, so same thing, kind of melamine plate, which has got some of my favourite Daniel Smiths on to be used in a mixed media kind of way. So there's definitely some Moonglow there. There are a couple of greys. I mean, do I remember? I'm sure Payne's grey is here somewhere. Shadow Violet is probably here. There's definitely one of my favourite, Grey Titanium. Pretty sure that is, or that is. And some greens, obviously. These have been sitting here for literally years. And I add a little bit extra when I want to use them again. If I've run out of, for instance, Moonglow, which you can see I use up quite quickly. And all you need to do to reactivate them is a spritz of water. It's quite nice when you're doing this to be able to get quite a lot of pigment on your brush, which is one of the reasons why it's quite nice to have them on a board like this, because then you really can reactivate that paint and fill up the brush with something quite delicious. I really didn't mean to go for a dark grey, but that seems to be where I've gone. I think this might be Shadow Violet, yes, because it has that lovely sense of shadow within it and just a hint of purpliness. So this is another of these very loose processes of just enjoying how colours work together. It's not a sort of precise process. You can make it as precise as you like, but it's another way to explore with your watercolour paints, discover how different amounts of water and different amounts of pigment will create different effects. There's a melancholy to that. That's Piemontite, genuine, which is one of the lovely mineral colours that Daniel Smith have. And I think it is going to be some Moonglow. So you can see I'm flexing between the palette and the pans here. There's the Moonglow going in. Always a touch of magic wherever Moonglow is involved. And I'm just going to play with letting that paint move and shift. I might pop in, whenever you're using watercolour paint, it's a good thing to have some kitchen towel or a cloth around so that you can alter the amount of water in your brush. If you've got too much water, then you can't get enough pigment onto the page. I'm thinking I might want a little bit of something a bit more. This burnt sienna light might give us just a touch of magic through the middle. And you can see what I mean about this pooling around the stems. I might create a little bit more Moonglow magic. So this time I'm going in with a much drier brush to pick up pigment, because I know there's plenty of water on the page, and just let that move through there like so. Because we've got a gessoed background, because it's not soaking straight into blank paper, you will get times when the paint will lift up rather than stay down. That's some Indanthrone blue that I've got there. Extraordinary names these paints have. Yes, that's what I want, just kind of moving through there. So as I say, it's a process of playing and allowing yourself to follow the instinct. I wanted something a bit bluer. and I allowed myself something a bit bluer. Why don't we do one with these American Journey paints that we've had out as well while we're here? Let's go with these beautiful seashore colours. You can see I've made this glass. Oh, really, when you're watercolour painting, seriously, you want one jar for rinsing the brush, one jar that you keep as clean as possible so that you can mix up new pigment with the clean water. I'm very good at just randomly cleaning my brush in both, but that's because I'm working in a more mixed media way today. If I were, for instance, painting botanicals, as you've seen in some flip throughs, I would probably give a lot more focus to looking after the clarity of the paint, of the water in the second jar, because that's what enables me to come back in and mix pure pigment, not contaminated with the colour of the water. Oh, that colour. That is either Coastal Fog or Pat's Coastal Blue. I think that's Pat's Coastal Blue, that one. This is the Periwinkle. Again, for details of these American Journey paints, I will put them here as well, but you can see them in action and sort of find out a lot more about them in those previous videos where we used them with the stencils. But I'm just going to let, because this grass could easily be found on a seashore. In fact, it was on an island, so wherever you are on a Greek island, you're never that far from the seashore. I think I want some more of this Coastal Blue. It's astonishing. It's just got that magic kind of sand dune look to it. So yeah, I'm just going to drive the paint in towards those stems a little bit. This was Andrew's turquoise that went down at the bottom here. And again, all those sort of things we've played with the distress inks, like for instance a little bit of watery splatter, will soften how watercolours work as well. Oh, I said we were going to experiment with putting some. Again, I'm going to let that dry because things will happen as it dries. This one over here, you can see that paint is continuing to mix and blend and sort of move, but look how it's pooling in those grasses. Look at that down at the base, magic. Watercolours always dry paler than they start out, so when you're looking at them with pigment, they will be different. Let's do a distress ink one while we're here. So you could do this with sprays. It'd be very easy to just pop some sprays on and let that be the thing. That's a couple of, that's Stormy Sky and Faded Jeans smooshed onto the mat there, and then I'm just going to pick them up. Down they go. So if you don't have watercolours, it's fine. Experiment with what you have got. There's never anything compulsory about any of this. And given these are all water-based pigments, it really should be possible. I want some Uncharted Mariner while I'm talking to you. It should be possible to mix in the watercolours with the distress paint. Should be possible to mix in the watercolour paints with the distress inks, and you'll get other kinds of effects. I want a little bit of walnut stain maybe into here. Favourite colour combinations, brown and blue. Can't go far wrong. Let's just clean that off a little bit. Let's get some brown going into the middle here. And look, you immediately get those magical kind of bronzy greens. The mixing of brown and blue is a special thing. There it goes. And with that, we could also, for instance, do some spattering of maybe salvage patina oxide might be fun to spatter onto there. And I'm going to use my trusty spatter brush. You can absolutely spatter watercolour paints. We'll do that in a minute as well. So just creating a little bit of textural detail. That oxide in contact with the moisture will do all the interesting things that oxides do. I'm going to leave that. Actually, yeah, I'm going to encourage a little bit of movement through the grass and then leave that to dry. We'll see how that compares once it's dry. Can't waste this, so let's find a or no, just a piece of card. Let's just have a piece of card. I'm going to add a little bit of water to these and pick them up. I'm going to start in the inks because they're translucent. There we go. Waste not, want not. I mean, look, I've got a seashore straight away. She sells seashells by the seashore. Sea, sky, little bit of sandy beach in the foreground. I'm going to leave that exactly as it is. Also to dry. I'm running out of places to put things. Let's pick up, I've got another piece of that. I don't know what this card is. There's offcuts just sitting in the shelf here. It feels quite cheap, not very interesting. So it's just another background to play with. There we go. Picking it up, picking it up. Nice, that'll do. You go over there to dry. Really have run out of places to dry things. One more, might as well use it up. There it is. A little bit of water on that one just to let it move. Grand. So mop up backgrounds into the bargain. That's probably enough with that. Lost my kitchen towel. There it is. So let's wipe that up. I will check in to see whether we are ready with our ones that we glued down at the beginning, or shall we maybe do one more? I mean, it's just such a lovely process. Such a simple, gorgeous way to play. Oh look, I put down my distress ink on top of this that was drying, and you can now see the shape of the distress ink in that wet paint. So I'm just going to, that's the trouble with having too much on the desk. I'm just going to soften that because I don't really want a square distress ink print. Let's have a look at how this one's doing. I want a little more water on this corner bit. I don't know what's... So this is the distress ink one, is it? No, this is the American Journey one. Ah, I know what this is. So there are places at the edge here where there wasn't any gesso, and just look at the difference of how that paint has taken direct onto the paper as opposed to where it's gone over the gesso, and that texture is fabulous. That's a much rougher application excuse me, of the gesso or watercolour ground, whatever it was I was using in 2017. But that's still doing beautiful things. I'm still going to let that dry by itself. And the watercolour is spreading out. What else should we do? Let's do, I'm feeling summery. Let's do another, let's start with some Andrews Turquoise. Put the distress inks out of the way. This is a messy few minutes of fun. I mean, messy in terms of the amount of stuff that is now on the desk. So I'm on my American Journey palette. I'm going to go in with some Andrews Turquoise, just getting that on, a little bit of water to help it move. And then I think I'm going to come in with, maybe some of these greys. I do love a good grey. There's the French grey up here. I believe that's the French grey. So I'm going to, again, try and get a decent amount of pigment on the brush. You can see when it's there. And just add that through the top here. Oh, I don't know what it is with me and grey, but it's a thing. Let's have a bit of this, which I think is the Coastal Fog. So Coastal Fog as opposed to Pat's Coastal Blue. And that's another lovely sand dune one. And as soon as it mixes with the Andrews Turquoise, you get all these extraordinary sort of duck egg turquoise things happening. So again, I'm just going to let that pigment play and travel and move. Might keep this one quite simple and grey, and let's have a bit of Pat's Coastal Blue in there as well. Just because we can. Just because we can. It's somewhere between the two, isn't it? Pat's Coastal Blue may be a mix of Andrews Turquoise and Coastal Fog by the look of things to me. I've come up with something quite similar. Well, that's good because I think I've only got a little one of Pat's Coastal Blue. But I've got Andrews Turquoise and I've got Coastal Fog. So I'll be able to mix up something approximating Pat's Coastal Blue. So I mentioned that you can also spatter with watercolour paints, of course. So picking up a bit of Andrews Turquoise again, onto my trusty spatter brush this time rather than a watercolour brush. There it goes through there. Oh, just look at, I mean, sorry, I'm off again with my I mean. Somebody wrote in the comments, when you said I mean, I knew exactly what you meant. So I'm glad. I hope the rest of you knew exactly what I meant as well. So a little bit more water will just encourage those spats to travel, which I'm quite keen on at the moment. And I might put some little bits of June bug. So that's this darker, still not sure which of these is June bug and which of these is the American Journey Indigo, but that's doing rather nice things in terms of just adding some contrast, some slightly darker contrast to there. Gorgeous, gorgeous. So we've got things drying all over the place, got stuff happening. And bear in mind that if something dries in an unsatisfactory kind of way, you can add more layers later on. Let yourself be drawn by what your heart sees, looks at, enjoys, wants more of. So for instance on here, sort of thinking I might put a stripe of this darker blue all the way along the bottom. And just let that travel upwards. And it'll create texture and beauty and all kinds of things. Grand. Let's leave that. As I said, I'm going to check the state of play on the ones we left drying in their glue. Back in a sec. Here we go. So I've trimmed the stems off the bottom. These are mostly dry. There's a slight tackiness left in places, but you can see, I think, as I wave that around in the light, that the glossy glue is definitely glossy, and I don't want it. So as I gesso these, it's with two purposes in mind: to create a watercolor surface or a paint surface over those grasses themselves, but also now to get rid of some of that shiny glue. The gesso is matte. Gesso is deliciously matte, and watercolor ground sort of even more so. But I think I'm going to stick with the gesso because the watercolor ground is so textured that it means you end up with texture other than the grassy texture, and at the moment I'm more interested in the grassy texture. So with this, again, quite a stiff bristled brush is going to be your ally here. But you can see that's going on. Maybe I'll zoom in a little for you. So as I was saying, a stiff bristled brush will be your ally here because it'll really get down into those holes. But you know, these brushes are good all-purpose craft brushes, and also they're so cheap that I really don't care if I mess it up by being brutal with it like this. It's not that I'm wrecking a brush I've spent loads of money on. I've mentioned them before. You get, I think it's 6 in a pack, 3 different sizes of flat and 3 different sizes of round, and they really are excellent. Pick them up in IKEA, in the children's art department, and don't ever let them stop selling them. The more we buy them, hopefully, the more they will produce and never stop. So yeah, again, I'm bopping down into these grasses to just try and get gesso right down into those places, and then not forgetting that what I also really want to do is make sure I've covered all of that glossy glue surface. At the moment it's wet because it's gesso wet, and that's fine. And remembering that some of those gessoed surfaces didn't go right to the edge on the other grasses, and that also makes a difference to how your paint goes down. So keep an eye out. I spotted that there was sort of extra gesso in between some of those grasses. You don't really need that either because it's just going to detract from the grass texture. But you can see how the gesso is also helping to bed these grasses into the page. So where there are places where, for instance, that bit of stem, third one across, is not quite glued down, this is going to tackle that. It will adhere via the gesso as the gesso dries. So it really is almost another gluing layer, but not quite. It has the effect of being another gluing layer in many ways. That's a beautiful shape on that grass, isn't it? It's just lovely. Let's get some over here. You don't have to have gesso. You could use an acrylic paint for this. That will also give you a surface that you can work on. it might give you a slightly different kind of surface to work on it. But if you want to use white paint, or of course, if you want to use any other colour paint, just straight down at this point, you could just paint over these. There's no need to do sort of gesso and then the watercolour layer. If you want to go straight in with acrylic paint, you could also explore with mid tints. I think that's probably going to be one for another day, because I'm on a watercolour stint at the moment. I'm enjoying playing with watercolours and just, yeah, stress-free way of exploring a medium that I really love and playing with colours that I really love. So that one's coming away. I'm going to give that a good dot down. Just, I mean, just, it's like a plaster relief at the moment. It's beautiful. I am remembering one reason why it's taken me 8 years to paint some more of these. It's because I also really love them in this naked state. The sort of sculptural relief of that, when I say relief, I mean like a sculpture, the relief you get in a wall. Just the joy of that kind of, this is still wet gesso, that's why that's shiny. The joy of those shapes and structures just now cast in white, so it's just all about the shadows. I'm going to give these a little blast with the heat gun, because I don't see why not. I gave them a little blast just to finish off drying the glue. So this is one of the older ones, these are the newer ones. I did give them a little blast when it was just the glue, and the fragrant grassy smell in the room was delicious. So I'm going to give these a little extra blast with the heat tool, and then come back and let's put some more paint on. So one thing I should say, obviously I've got these from my garden. I let the back garden grow wild quite often through this time of year, May, June, April, May, June, to get, sort of specifically to get meadow grasses, but also for wildlife, to encourage as much diversity as possible in the garden. And I did, oh, I've got to go and look it up. I saw the most extraordinary shimmering dark blue, what I think must have been a dragonfly, had a really slender body, sort of far smaller than anything I've ever seen before. I would say probably that sort of straw thickness. So I've got all these grasses growing in the garden in multiplicities. If you don't have a garden and you're collecting these, I don't know, in hedgerows or out on walks or things, it sort of goes without saying that you shouldn't take every single one in sight. Leave some there to seed for the future. The countryside needs these grasses, needs diversity. Different insects need different ones to pollinate, to feed. So never sort of take every single grass in sight in an area. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure you all know that perfectly well. The other thing that is very clear to me as I look at these, enjoying the sculptural look of them, is that all of these are a lot thicker on the paper than these Greek ones. Now that's not because the Greek ones have dried over the course of the last 8 years. They just were very fine wispy grasses, just really beautiful grasses. So these are going to have a different look about them. Are we dry? I think we're dry enough to play. If I get a slightly chalky look to my paints, so be it. I can't wait any longer. I want to dive in with some colour. Got my beachy palette as well, because I think these ones really do remind me of grassy sand dunes. So I think I'm going to go in. Look, there's one of the stems I snipped off, has landed in the palette. Going to start with Pat's Coastal Blue in there. Let's get a little bit more water. So reactivating the pigment again, and you can see there's all these places in the middle where I've mixed colours in various degrees, and so it will be picking up bits of Junebug potentially, maybe bits of indigo, but essentially that's Pat's Coastal Blue. And I'm going to start by getting some of that just down in between these grasses and let it wander off up there. It's a really greeny blue. Let's face it, let's get some Periwinkle into the mix. Yes. Maybe some of this, which I think is something approaching a shadow violet. I forget, but that's also rather nice. So these coastal colours in the American Journey are sort of chalky and opaque in the way that oxides are chalky and opaque compared to distress inks. They have a very different look, whereas most of the Daniel Smith paints that I work with are very translucent, very highly translucent, and in lots of cases highly granulating. So it is a different look if you've got paints with a sort of chalky finish. Oh, is that beautiful or is that beautiful? Shall I go? I'll take a little bit more of Pat's Coastal Blue just down into here. Interestingly, having added that shadow violet affair, it's gone sort of lavendery as opposed to coastal, but I'm fine with it because it's beautiful. So this is a bit of coastal fog just coming across the top, which should get us a little bit more sand dune because it's got that sort of yellowy grey affair within it. That I sort of don't really want to mess with that too much more because I love the transitions of colour across it. I could try and get a bit more pigment resting down into these grasses. We're here to play. So just dropping quite a pigment heavy brush load of the Periwinkle into that one. I think we'll drop quite a pigment heavy brush load of Pat's Coastal Blue maybe into this center one, just to make sure we've really got pigment on these stems, not just gesso. Although another thing it could be nice to do would be to kind of encourage, maybe one could sand back these grasses and have the plants in a whiter shade against those backgrounds. But that's making me pretty happy at the moment, so I'm gonna let it. I'm just adding this for a little bit of extra textural detail. You saw a bit of grass coming up there. For the moment, I'm fine with that. In the long run, I'll see whether I want to do something to secure it a bit further. I'm going to lift some of that up a little bit. Not terribly interested in having it completely blue. Yeah, back again. So here's another thing. If you're working while it's still wet, you can easily pick colour up and reapply. I'm going back in with Pat's Coastal Blue just to reaffirm that in amongst the purples. Nice, let's let that dry. On to one of our other new ones. I really have run out of places to let things dry now. Are you dryish? Yes, I would say so. Okay, let's go sort of June buggy with this one. That I think is the indigo, the dark. Oh, look at that over those leafy textures. Fronds, that's the word. Grassy fronds. It's a good word. You need to go right the way down to the bottom because my stems are going right the way down to the bottom. So some of the Greek ones have got much more of a frame around them, but I think this one just wants to go right to the bottom, and that I believe is the June bug with that sort of kick of ocean green. It's sort of almost the colour of that dragonfly that I started talking about and then got distracted because I was painting. I think in the interests of chalky beauty, I'm going back in with Pat's Coastal Blue coming down from the other corner of this. And again, where it blends, that's sort of where the magic happens. So I'm just adding some water in that time. That was a dip into the water hole, the water jar, just to allow what I've got now on the page to move. So when you're playing with watercolour, the key's kind of in the name. It's water and colour, and it's when the two things interact that the real magic can really take off. I think I want a little bit of this French grey, just mixing in somewhere here into these deep blues, just because I can, and somewhere into there. So again, I'm tempted to just leave that be. I might do a little, maybe a little spatter of the French grey. Could be interesting just to see what that gets us. Oh, look at that. just adding to the texture, just creating a little bit of magic through there. So conversely, let's maybe spat a little bit of Junebug into these upper areas. Where that dark paint is resting into those leaves, there's real magic happening. Grand. So we've got you. I'm thinking, thinking I need somewhere else to dry things. Thinking I might go for something full-on green maybe into the next one. Just noticed there's 2 more stems in this palette. Oh, because I had the palette resting on the bin when I was snipping them. Right, let's go. Old favourites, sap green is here in the palette. I'm not sure it's also on this palette, but I can just get a good hit of sap green by going direct to the source. And then into that, I think we might introduce, what should we have? Maybe Lunar Blue. That's a nice granulating colour. I've still got sap green on the brush, very much so. That's not the colour of Lunar Blue. If there's such a thing as Lunar Green, that would be Lunar Green. So this time, let's clean the brush a little better. In the clean water, perhaps. Oh, look, I've left my splat brush in the water again. That's how I wrecked my splat brush in the first place. It used to be a lovely brush. I left it standing in the water jar. And off we went. Right, a little bit of water here to just keep that line soft. I don't want that drying on me, because then they won't blend. If you allow them to dry in between, you won't be able to get a blend of the colours, and that's really what I'm interested in here. That's a bit more Lunar Blue, that beautiful soft grey, but there it is blending with the green, and so you get your grey-green in between. Lovely. Might come in with a bit of something turquoisey or cerulean blue, something like that, maybe coming down from this top corner. Yes, that's nice. A bit more water, again, to let the paint play. That's a beauty. Might come in for some more cerulean blue, I think. That's very nice. I like that a lot. A little bit more. It's a lovely soft blue, cerulean blue, but it does mix beautifully with greens, as you can see, to get these kinds of soft turquoisey tones. Might again go for a little touch of splatter. Yeah, why not cerulean blue? Let's have you. There it is. So just adding texture, and again, if I leave that to dry, that's going to sort of spread out into those areas, continue to interact, continue to shift and change and move within those textures. And finally, of the new ones, here we go. Thinking I might want to go a little bit brown and blue again. Let's have some Moonglow. Haven't had any Moonglow for a while. Moonglow over the new grasses. We've got plenty of Moonglow on the Greek ones, so let's let the magic of Moonglow loose onto these new check grasses. And one reason I'm using a lot of this is that Moonglow has within it several pigment colours, so that you will get shifts of colour even just using Moonglow. But to it, I'm going to add some more of that Piemontite Genuine, which I really like as a mix with Moonglow. It's got that sort of little touch of melancholy to it as a mixture that somehow feeds something in my soul. I don't know what it is. So again, I'm going to just add a little bit of water to that leading edge while I decide what colour is going to go in at the top there. I wonder if it's Pat's Coastal Blue. I wonder what happens. I don't think I've ever mixed Pat's Coastal Blue with these two. Ooh, I say. So something very earthy and delicious about that. I need a bit more pigment, so I'm going to try and work with a slightly drier brush to pick up a bit more pigment to just lay down into those grasses. And again, a bit more of this burnt sienna maybe as a sunburnt glow over that top corner. And again, letting it drop down into the grassy areas. I think I'm going to let that dry and let that do whatever it does as it does so. Just even out that line a little bit at the top. Bit more pigment into that top corner. Coastal fog as opposed to Pat's coastal blue. Coastal fog just up there for that sort of sandiness. I think that's rather nice. Grand, drying time. And we'll be back for a close-up. I hope you've enjoyed that little journey through all these grasses. I will do a close-up across the table, but I might also just flick through all the ones you can see. Don't forget, we also had some mop-up backgrounds along the way. And yeah, I'll try to stick to the new ones we've made, but I can't remember what's new and what's old, really, to be honest here. I've got them all in a beautiful pile. In any case, thank you so much for your company. If you've enjoyed that, do give me a thumbs up. Thank you to anyone who has bought me a cup of coffee or is regularly enjoying the gold, silver and bronze bonuses over at the Buy Me a Coffee page. That link also always below the videos in the description. I'll leave details of as many of these paints as I can remember. And yeah, happy grassy watercolour playtime, everyone. Thanks so much for your company and happy crafting all.